You're just a poor office clerk." My mother laughed in front of the whole family. She had no idea what I actually did for a living. Months later, I would walk into my grandfather's birthday party with federal investigators beside me. Before anyone could stop him, my 83-year-old grandfather stood up, looked everyone in the eye, and finally told the truth he had been too afraid to say for years. Everything changed after that. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Elizabeth Taylor. I'm 35 years old and I live in Lexington, Kentucky. For almost 11 years, I've worked investigating financial fraud involving government retirement benefits. Most people picture boring paperwork when they hear that. Honestly, I don't blame them. That's exactly what my family thought I did. Whenever someone asked about my job during Thanksgiving or Christmas, my mother usually answered before I had the chance. "Elizabeth works for the government," she'd say with a shrug. "Basically office paperwork." Sometimes my stepfather Michael would grin and add, "She's probably the one losing everyone's forms." Everyone laughed, including my younger brother Jason. I usually laughed too. Correcting them never seemed worth the effort. The truth was a lot less exciting than television, but a lot more serious than they realized. My team investigated stolen retirement benefits, identity theft targeting senior citizens, forged financial documents, and fraudulent bank account changes. Most of my work happened quietly behind computer screens, interview rooms, and stacks of financial records. When everything went well, nobody ever heard about us. When everything went wrong, someone's entire retirement could disappear. I'd spent years helping recover money stolen from elderly people who trusted the wrong person. I just never imagined one day I'd be looking at my own family. Back then, though, none of that was on my mind. The person I looked forward to talking with the most wasn't my mother. It was my grandfather, Arthur. Grandpa Arthur was 82, a retired Army veteran, and one of the most organized people I'd ever known. He had little routines that never changed. Every morning started with coffee before sunrise. Every grocery receipt went into the same kitchen drawer. Every bill was paid early. And every month, without fail, I received a postcard. Not a birthday card, not a holiday card, a postcard. He mailed one at the beginning of every single month. Sometimes it showed a covered bridge somewhere in Kentucky. Sometimes an old train station. Sometimes just a picture of horses grazing in a field. The front never really mattered. It was the message on the back. "Hope work isn't keeping you too busy. Found the tomatoes you like at the farmer's market. The dog next door still barks at squirrels." Nothing dramatic. Nothing life-changing. Just little snapshots from his life. Most people would probably throw those cards away after reading them. I kept every single one. They sat in a small wooden box on a shelf in my apartment. Whenever work got especially exhausting, I'd pull a few out and read them again. Somehow they reminded me there were still decent people in the world. Grandpa never missed a month. Not once. Not when Grandma passed away. Not during snowstorms. Not even after a minor surgery that kept him in the hospital for several days. If he couldn't write much, he'd simply scribble, "Doing fine. Love you." That was enough. One Saturday morning, I was sorting through my mail before heading out for groceries. Electric bill, credit card statement, local grocery coupons, no postcard. I frowned for a second, then shrugged. Maybe the mail was running late. It happened. A few more days passed. Still nothing. I found myself checking the mailbox a little more carefully than usual. By the end of the week, I knew something felt different. Not frightening. Just unusual. I even caught myself looking toward the wooden box on my bookshelf. For almost 20 years, I'd never had to wonder whether Grandpa's postcard was coming. It always did. That simple routine had become so predictable that its absence suddenly felt louder than I expected. I tried telling myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he'd forgotten. Maybe the post office misplaced it. Maybe he'd gone on a short trip with friends from the veterans group. There were dozens of perfectly reasonable explanations. Even so, as I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, I scrolled down until I found the contact I'd never expected to hesitate before calling. Grandpa Arthur. My grandfather answered on the third ring. "Well, look who finally remembered her old grandpa," he said with a chuckle. I smiled the second I heard his voice. "You're the one who forgot me this month." He laughed again. "I did? No postcard." There was a short pause, long enough that I pulled the phone away to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "I've been meaning to send one," he finally said. "Things have been a little busy around here." That answer didn't sound like him. Grandpa Arthur always mailed those cards before the first week of every month. It wasn't something he remembered when he had time. It was part of his routine. "You feeling okay?" I asked. "Oh, I'm fine, just getting older." "How's the garden?" "It's doing all right." That caught my attention. Normally, asking about his tomatoes meant listening to a 5-minute update about squirrels, weather, and whichever neighbor kept borrowing his hose. This time, 3 words. "What about the veterans' breakfast? You still meeting those guys every Thursday?" Another pause. "Not lately." Before I could ask why, I heard my mother in the background. "Dad, you've been on the phone long enough." Grandpa lowered his voice. "I should let you go, sweetheart." "What? We just started talking." "We'll catch up another time." The line went dead. The call had lasted 1 minute and 43 seconds. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Families interrupted each other all the time. Still, something about Grandpa's voice stayed with me. It wasn't fear. It was restraint. Like someone choosing every word carefully. I went back to work and focused on my own cases. One involved an elderly widow whose retirement checks had been redirected without her knowledge. Another centered on forged signatures. The rule was always the same. Don't jump to conclusions. Collect facts first. So I waited. 3 days later, I called again. Grandpa answered faster this time. "Elizabeth." His voice brightened. "I was hoping you'd call." That sounded more like him. "I figured I'd check whether my postcard got lost again." He laughed softly. "I owe you one." "You owe me 2 now." "I guess I do." For a few seconds, everything felt normal. We even laughed about an old fishing trip. Then, "Dad." Mom's voice again. Closer this time. "You need your medication." Grandpa stopped talking mid-sentence. "I should probably—" "Grandpa, wait. You know how your mother worries." "My mother?" Another awkward silence. "I mean, your mom worries about me. I'll call again soon." "I'd like that." Click. 1 minute and 51 seconds. Almost identical to the first call. Grandpa had always been the kind of man who could talk for 20 minutes without stopping. Now every conversation ended before it really began. I decided to call Jason. "Hey Liz, what's up? You been over to Grandpa's lately?" "Yeah, why? Does he seem different?" Jason laughed. "What kind of question is that?" "I don't know. Quieter, maybe." "He's 82. "I know." "You're doing that investigator thing again." "I asked a simple question." "No, you asked it like you're interviewing a suspect." I sighed. I just haven't had a normal conversation with him in weeks. "You live a couple hours away now," Jason said. "Mom's there all the time. She's helping him with groceries, appointments, paperwork, everything. So maybe he's just tired." His tone wasn't angry, just dismissive. "You always think there's some hidden story." "I investigate fraud for a living." "Exactly." He laughed. "Not every family needs an investigation." After we hung up, One sentence kept replaying in my head. Mom's there all the time, helping with paperwork. I opened my work calendar, looked at the upcoming long weekend, and requested a day off. I didn't text my mother. If I was going to see Grandpa, I wanted it to look exactly like what it was, a granddaughter stopping by unexpectedly. The drive to my grandfather's house took a little over 2 hours. Long enough for me to talk myself out of every bad possibility I'd imagined. Maybe Jason was right. Maybe Grandpa had simply slowed down. Maybe Mom was helping more because he finally needed it. By the time I pulled into the familiar neighborhood, I'd almost convinced myself I'd wasted a vacation day. Grandpa's little white house looked exactly the way I remembered it. The flag still hung by the front porch. The flower beds were neat. Nothing looked out of place. I barely had time to knock before the front door opened. Elizabeth. My mother smiled and wrapped me in a quick hug. This is a surprise. I had a long weekend, I said. Figured I'd stop by. Well, you should have called. It was a harmless sentence. People say that all the time. Still, something about the hesitation before she smiled made it sound less like hospitality and more like disappointment that I hadn't given her any warning. Michael appeared behind her holding a coffee mug. Look who finally escaped her government desk. He grinned. I smiled back. Good to see you too. Still pushing paperwork? Something like that. I let him believe it, just like always. Grandpa slowly came around the corner. The second he saw me, his whole face lit up. Lizzie. No one had called me that since I was a teenager. He pulled me into a hug that lasted a little longer than usual. I'm glad you're here, he said quietly. So am I. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Mom offered coffee. Jason wandered in from the backyard carrying a bag of charcoal for the grill. Well, he laughed. Should I hide my wallet? The family investigator is here. I rolled my eyes. I came to see Grandpa. That's exactly what an investigator would say. Everyone laughed. Even Grandpa managed a small smile. The conversation drifted toward ordinary things. Jason talked about work. Michael complained about gas prices. Mom discussed church events and neighbors I'd almost forgotten. It sounded like any other family visit. Whenever I asked Grandpa something directly, though, the rhythm changed. How have you been sleeping? I asked. Oh, not too bad. Before he could say anything else, Michael jumped in. He's been doing great. We've got him on a better schedule. A few minutes later, I asked, still watching those old westerns every afternoon? Grandpa opened his mouth. Mom answered first. Not as much anymore? I was asking Grandpa. She smiled. I know. I just thought I'd save him the trouble. Nobody else seemed to notice. I did. The afternoon continued that way. Every time Grandpa started telling a story, someone finished it for him. Every time I asked a question, someone answered before he could. Not once. Over and over. I finally managed to catch him alone for less than a minute, while everyone else was outside checking the grill. How are you really doing? I asked quietly. He looked at me, then toward the back door. I'm all right. You sure? He nodded, but he wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes had shifted toward the kitchen entrance. Mom walked back into the room carrying a bowl of potato salad. Grandpa immediately stopped talking. So, she said brightly, who wants lemonade? The moment disappeared. Lunch was comfortable enough on the surface. Jason kept joking. Michael teased me about working for the government. Mom insisted I take leftovers home. Anyone walking past the house would have thought we were one big happy family, but I couldn't ignore one small detail. Every single time Grandpa answered me, he glanced at Mom first. Not every now and then. Every time. Like he needed to make sure his answer was acceptable. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was simply habit after she'd spent so much time helping him. I wanted to believe that. After lunch, Grandpa stood up with his empty glass. "I'm going to refill this." "I'll help," I said. He smiled. "I've still got 2 good legs." He shuffled toward the kitchen by himself. As I waited near the dining table, my eyes drifted across the room. Something sitting on the corner of the kitchen counter immediately caught my attention. Grandpa's desk calendar. He'd kept one for as long as I could remember. Every day used to be covered with tiny notes. Appointments, grocery lists, birthdays, even how much he'd spent on gas. This one was open to the current month. The pages were completely blank. I couldn't stop looking at the calendar. Every square for the month was empty. Not one appointment, not one reminder, not even Grandpa's usual tiny notes about groceries or the weather. That wasn't like him. When I was a kid, he used to joke that if the house ever caught fire, he'd grab 2 things first: his army photo album and his desk calendar. He wrote everything down. Always had. "Need a refill?" Grandpa's voice pulled me back. He stood beside me, holding his glass. I smiled. "Yeah, thanks." I didn't mention the calendar. Not yet. There could be an explanation. Maybe he'd started using his phone. Although I couldn't picture Grandpa Arthur trusting a smartphone enough to replace a paper calendar. A little later, Mom asked if I could help carry a few things into the pantry. While she was outside talking to Jason, I opened the medicine cabinet looking for the paper towels she'd mentioned. A prescription bag caught my eye. Arthur Bennett. Heart medication. The pharmacy label showed it should have been picked up almost 3 weeks earlier. The bag was still sealed. I quietly closed the cabinet. Again. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the prescription had changed. Maybe the pharmacy had delivered a duplicate. One strange detail didn't mean much. Several strange details? That was different. Michael walked in carrying a bag of ice. "You looking for something?" "Paper towels." He pointed without hesitation. "Bottom shelf." I thanked him and let it go. The last thing I wanted was for anyone to think I was snooping. The afternoon settled into normal family conversation. Mom insisted everyone take leftovers home. Jason argued with Michael about football. Grandpa mostly listened. I noticed he barely touched his food. When he did speak, it was usually because someone asked him a direct question. Even then, his answers were short. Before leaving, I wandered toward the garage. It had always been Grandpa's favorite part of the house. He kept his tools organized with military precision. His old army memorabilia covered one wall, and parked in the center was usually his pride and joy. A dark green pickup he'd owned for years. The garage door was open, the truck was gone. I looked around once, thinking maybe he'd parked outside. Nothing. Michael stepped up beside me. "Looking for something?" "Grandpa's truck." "Oh," he shrugged. "We sold it." "We?" "Well, your grandfather agreed. He doesn't drive anymore." His answer came almost too fast. I didn't know he wanted to sell it. It was time. Grandpa had refused offers on that truck for years. He once told me he'd rather give it away than sell it to someone who wouldn't take care of it. Maybe he'd changed his mind. People did. Still, I wished I'd heard that decision from him instead of Michael. Back inside, I offered to take the trash out before leaving. The mailbox stood near the driveway. Mostly junk mail. A grocery flyer, 2 advertisements, an insurance offer. No bank envelopes. That surprised me more than it should have. Grandpa used to complain about how many financial statements arrived every month. He never switched to paperless billing because, in his words, "If I can't hold it, I can't trust it." Now there wasn't a single statement. Mom noticed me glancing toward the mailbox. "Oh, don't worry about those," she said casually. "I've been helping Dad keep up with all the financial paperwork." She smiled as if she'd answered a question I hadn't asked. "Less clutter for him." "That makes sense," I replied. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. I couldn't tell anymore. By late afternoon, I grabbed my overnight bag and thanked everyone for lunch. Jason slapped me on the shoulder. See? No family conspiracy. I forced a smile. Guess not. Mom hugged me. Next time, call first. I will. Grandpa walked me to my car. The others stayed on the porch. He reached for my hand instead of hugging me goodbye. His grip was firmer than I expected. He looked straight at me. His mouth opened slightly. Elizabeth? For a moment, it seemed like he was finally about to say everything he'd been holding back. Carol stepped outside before another word could leave his mouth. Dad, she called with a bright smile. Come inside. Your dinner's getting cold. Grandpa slowly released my hand. I'll talk to you soon, sweetheart. He turned and followed her back into the house. The drive home felt longer than the drive there. I kept replaying the visit in my head, trying to separate facts from assumptions. An empty calendar, an unopened prescription, a missing truck. No bank statements. None of those things proved anything on their own. People got older. Families stepped in to help. Life changed. I knew better than most how dangerous it was to build a case on suspicion instead of evidence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the pieces didn't fit together. A couple of days later, I found myself back in Grandpa's neighborhood during my lunch break. Not because I planned it. I had a meeting nearby, and curiosity got the better of me. I stopped at the small diner Grandpa used to love. The waitress recognized me immediately. Elizabeth? It's been forever. Hi, Donna. She smiled. How's your grandpa doing? Haven't seen him in a while. I tried to sound casual. He hasn't been coming in? She shook her head. Not for months. Really? I figured maybe your mom was cooking for him more. That wasn't unusual. Donna had known our family for years. She wasn't trying to tell me anything. She was simply answering my question. Before leaving, she added, Tell Arthur we miss hearing his stories. I will. Outside, I noticed Mr. Harris trimming hedges across the street. He'd lived next door to Grandpa for as long as I could remember. We talked for a few minutes about the weather before I asked, You still see Grandpa driving around? Mr. Harris frowned. No. Not lately? Haven't seen that old truck in ages. I heard he sold it. Did he? He looked genuinely surprised. I thought maybe it was in the repair shop. That answer lingered with me. On the way back to my car, another neighbor, Mrs. Collins, waved from her porch. She smiled warmly. Your mother has been wonderful with Arthur. She has? Oh, yes. She handles all his bills now. Makes life easier for him. She said it with complete sincerity. There wasn't even a hint of concern in her voice. As far as the neighbors were concerned, Carol was simply being a devoted daughter. That was exactly what made the situation so difficult. From the outside, everything looked responsible. Everything looked normal. My phone buzzed before I started the engine. Jason. Hey. You've been asking around the neighborhood? His tone wasn't friendly this time. I talked to a couple of people. Why? I was just checking on Grandpa. No. He sighed. You're investigating him. I talked to 2 neighbors. You always do this. What does that mean? You come home acting like everyone is hiding something. I never said that. You don't have to. His frustration was obvious now. Mom told me you've been asking questions about the truck and Grandpa's mail. I asked because things don't add up. They don't add up to you. There was a long pause. Then he said quietly, You know, not every problem is a crime. I know. Do you? He ended the call before I could answer. I sat in my car for several minutes. Jason wasn't completely wrong. My job had trained me to notice patterns most people ignored. Sometimes those patterns meant absolutely nothing. Other times, Ignoring them cost someone everything. Back at my office, I opened my notebook instead of my email. For the first time, I wrote Grandpa's name across the top of a blank page. Underneath it, I listed only facts. No theories, no conclusions, missing postcard, calls cut short, calendar blank, medication untouched, truck gone, no bank mail. Neighbors hadn't seen him driving in months. When I finished, I stared at the list. I wasn't looking at one strange coincidence anymore. I was looking at several. If this had been anyone else's grandfather, I already knew what I would recommend. The hardest part was admitting that this one happened to be mine. I closed the notebook, picked up my office phone, and reached for the internal directory. Whatever happened next couldn't come from me acting as a worried granddaughter alone. It had to go through the proper channels, even if that meant my own family would become part of the investigation. Making the report was one of the hardest things I'd done in my career. Not because the paperwork was complicated. I'd completed hundreds of referrals over the years. This one was different because every name I typed belonged to someone I'd shared holiday dinners with. Department policy was clear. If a case involved a family member or someone close to you, you stepped away immediately. No exceptions. I documented everything I'd personally observed, attached my notes, and sent the referral to another investigative team. Once I hit submit, the case was officially out of my hands, at least on paper. A few days later, one of the investigators assigned to the referral stopped by my office. He closed the door behind him. "I've read your report. I won't be asking for updates," I said before he could continue. He nodded. "I know the rules. I just needed to clarify a couple of dates." That was it. No strategy, no details, no discussion about where the investigation might lead. I answered his questions and let him leave. Walking away felt strange. For years, I'd been the person asking those questions. Now, I had to trust someone else to do it. The investigation moved exactly the way these cases usually did. Slowly. Government records had to be requested. Financial documents had to be verified. Every change had to be supported by paperwork. Nothing happened overnight. While all that was going on, my family started noticing small changes. Mom called me one evening. "Do you know why someone from Social Security has been trying to reach Dad?" I kept my voice calm. "I don't. They've called twice this week." "Did they leave a message?" "They said they needed to confirm some account information." She sounded irritated more than worried. "It's ridiculous. I'm the one helping Dad with all of that." I didn't respond. She filled the silence herself. "You wouldn't know anything about this, would you?" "No." That wasn't a lie. I truly didn't know what steps the assigned investigators were taking. We ended the call politely, but neither of us sounded convinced. Jason called the following afternoon. His tone was very different. "What the hell is going on?" "What do you mean?" "Mom says government investigators keep contacting Grandpa." I leaned back in my chair. "If they're calling, they have a reason." He let out a frustrated laugh. "Funny how that started right after your visit." "Jason?" "No, seriously." His voice grew sharper. "You embarrassed Mom by snooping around the neighborhood, and now this?" "I didn't accuse anyone of anything." "You didn't have to." He paused. "You've always thought you're the smartest person in the room." That one stung more than I expected. "I've never thought that." "Then stop treating your own family like suspects." The call ended before I could answer. For a moment, I just sat there looking out my office window. I understood why Jason was angry. From his perspective, our mother had spent months helping Grandpa with appointments, errands, and paperwork. Now strangers from the government were calling because of questions I'd raised. It probably looked like I was attacking the people closest to him. Work kept me busy enough that I forced myself to stop thinking about it. Then, almost 2 weeks after submitting the referral, my office phone rang. It was the investigator handling the case. I can't discuss the investigation, he said immediately. I know. I only need to confirm one thing from your notes. Go ahead. You mentioned bank statements no longer arriving at Mr. Bennett's residence. That's right. There was a brief pause. We've confirmed something related. I stayed quiet. The mailing address connected to his retirement benefits was changed. Even without hearing anything else, my stomach tightened. He wasn't supposed to tell me more. I wasn't supposed to ask. But before ending the call, he added one final sentence. The new mailing address isn't your grandfather's house. The line went silent. I slowly lowered the phone, already knowing there were only a handful of places it could have been redirected. A few minutes later, an internal notification confirmed the address investigators had verified. It belonged to my mother's house. Seeing my mother's address attached to Grandpa's retirement records changed everything. Not because it proved a crime. It didn't. There were perfectly legal reasons someone might help an elderly parent receive important mail. I reminded myself of that more than once. The investigation kept moving, one document at a time. From that point on, I heard very little unless the assigned investigators needed to verify something I'd already reported. That was frustrating, but it was the right way to handle it. If I wanted the case to hold up, the rules had to apply to me too. Weeks passed. Work stayed busy. I investigated other victims, other families, other stolen retirement benefits. But every time an elderly client told me I trusted my own children, I found myself thinking about Grandpa. One afternoon, the investigator assigned to the case stopped by my office again. I only need you to confirm a timeline. I nodded. Go ahead. You said your grandfather's postcards stopped around the same period he became harder to reach. That's right. He made a note. Then he thanked me and stood to leave. He never discussed evidence. He didn't have to. The fact that they were still asking questions told me the investigation was growing, not shrinking. A few days later, my phone rang while I was reviewing another case. It was Mom. This has gone far enough. Her voice was calm, but only barely. I don't know what you mean. Don't play games with me. I wasn't. Government people have been trying to schedule meetings with Dad. I stayed quiet. They showed up once when I wasn't even home. Did Grandpa talk to them? They never got the chance. Why not? He wasn't feeling well. The answer came too quickly. Before I could respond, she continued. The next time they came, he was asleep. And the time after that? We had a doctor's appointment. Every explanation sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they formed a pattern. No one could ever speak with Grandpa alone. The call ended a minute later. She didn't accuse me directly. She didn't have to. Jason did. He showed up outside my office building the following Friday. I almost didn't recognize his truck. He climbed out before I'd even reached my car. What are you doing here? We need to talk. His jaw was tight. You've turned Mom into some kind of criminal. I haven't turned anyone into anything. People keep asking questions. They're doing their jobs. No. He pointed at me. They're doing your job. I don't control this investigation. You started it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then his shoulders dropped. I don't even recognize you anymore. That hurt. Not because it was true, because he believed it. I love Grandpa, I said quietly. So do we. He got back into his truck and drove away. I watched the taillights disappear before heading inside. There are moments in investigations when everything seems stuck. Witnesses can't be interviewed. Records take weeks to arrive. Every answer creates two new questions. This case reached that stage. Then, the first real breakthrough came. Investigators confirmed Grandpa's retirement payment information hadn't been changed just once. It had been updated several times over the previous 3 years. Different account information, different contact details. Each change appeared legitimate on the surface. Each one carried the required electronic forms. Even more troubling, Grandpa's phone number listed in the records wasn't the same one I'd been calling for years. Someone had changed the official contact information too. That explained why investigators had struggled to reach him directly. The final piece arrived through the digital audit. Electronic submission records don't tell investigators everything, but they often reveal where a document entered the system. This time, they revealed exactly that. The account changes had been submitted through the same home internet connection. The registered address belonged to Carol and Michael. The investigation immediately expanded. A full financial audit was ordered. Nobody shared the results with me, not officially. But late one afternoon, the lead investigator stopped outside my office. He didn't come in. He simply looked at me for a moment and said quietly, "The audit is finished." I searched his face for any clue. He didn't reveal the number. He didn't have to. Whatever they'd found, it was far worse than any of us had expected. The audit confirmed what everyone had been afraid to say out loud. Almost $96,000 was gone. Not over 10 years, not over a lifetime, 34 months. I wasn't part of the meeting where investigators reviewed every document, but once the financial analysis was complete, they were allowed to show me the final findings that related to the referral I'd submitted. No opinions, just numbers. I sat across from the lead investigator as he slid a summary across the table. "Take your time." I looked at the first page. Month after month, Grandpa's retirement payment had been deposited. Then, almost immediately, an automatic transfer moved money somewhere else. Same amount, same pattern, again and again. "Where did it go?" I asked. He pointed to another page, an account controlled by Michael. I stared at the line for several seconds. Even after years of working fraud cases, seeing my stepfather's name there didn't feel real. I turned another page. Vehicle purchase, a brand new SUV. Payment source, funds traced back to Grandpa's retirement benefits. The next page listed travel expenses, hotel reservations, airfare, restaurant charges, a week-long family vacation. Every payment followed the same trail. I recognized the dates immediately. That vacation. I remembered turning down the invitation because I couldn't get time off work. Mom had laughed over the phone. "Don't work too hard while we're relaxing." At the time, I thought Michael had finally gotten back on his feet financially. Now I knew better. The investigator remained quiet while I kept reading. Credit card payments, home improvement expenses, insurance premiums, utility bills, personal purchases, one transaction after another. The money hadn't disappeared. It had been spent. The hardest page to read wasn't the one with the biggest number. It was the last one. Grandpa's property taxes had fallen behind. His health insurance premiums had nearly lapsed. His heart medication had gone unpaid more than once. I looked up. They were paying for vacations. I couldn't finish the sentence. The investigator nodded. While essential expenses weren't consistently being covered. I closed the folder. For the first time since this investigation began, I wasn't thinking like an investigator. I was thinking like a granddaughter. Grandpa had spent his entire life planning ahead. He never missed a payment. He never bought expensive things for himself. He believed financial security meant independence. Someone had taken that away from him. I wanted to be angry. Part of me was. Another part still searched for an explanation that would somehow make my mother innocent. Maybe Grandpa had agreed. Maybe he'd wanted to help them. Maybe there was a family arrangement nobody had told me about. The lead investigator seemed to know exactly what I was thinking. "We're not finished." I looked at him. "The money trail is strong." He tapped the file. "But financial transfers alone don't answer the biggest question. Consent." He nodded. "Exactly." If Grandpa knowingly authorized every transfer, this case became very different. If he'd been manipulated, threatened, or deceived, that was something else entirely. We still need to establish whether those decisions were voluntary. I left the office carrying more questions than answers. A few days later, I visited Grandpa again. This time, the atmosphere felt strangely lighter. Mom said she was running errands. Michael had gone to meet someone across town. Jason wasn't there. For the first time in weeks, Grandpa and I had nearly an hour together. We drank coffee, talked about baseball. He smiled more than I'd seen in months. At one point, he asked if I could help straighten up the hall closet. "It's getting harder for me to reach the top shelf," he admitted. Of course. We laughed as we sorted through old boxes filled with Christmas decorations, fishing gear, and family keepsakes. Near the back of the closet, I spotted a worn leather photo album I'd never seen before. The cover was faded from years of use. Grandpa smiled when he noticed me holding it. "Oh. I haven't looked through that in a long time." He brushed a little dust off the cover with the palm of his hand. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "There's a lot of history in there." I carried the album to the kitchen table and slowly opened the first page. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. Old family cookouts, fishing trips, Christmas mornings, Grandma laughing with flour on her face after baking pies. Grandpa pointed at one picture and smiled. "That was the summer your brother fell into the lake," I laughed. "Jason still claims somebody pushed him. He slipped." "I know. He just doesn't like admitting it." For a little while, it felt good to forget everything else. We flipped through another page, then another. Something small caught my eye. On the back of one photograph, written in faint pencil, was a number. 17,842. No $sign. No explanation. Just the number. "What does this mean?" I asked. Grandpa looked at it for a second. "Oh." He smiled absent-mindedly. "I used to write little notes." "What kind of notes?" "Oh, whatever I wanted to remember." He didn't say anything else. I kept turning pages. Another photograph. Another tiny number. 18,305. A few pages later, 18,991. The handwriting was the same. Always tucked into the lower corner where nobody would think to look. At first I assumed they were dates. Then I noticed they didn't make sense as dates. Maybe fishing license numbers, maybe film roll numbers. Except they kept changing in a pattern. Slowly, steadily, almost like balances. I tried not to react. Instead, I casually asked, "You've always written on your photos?" "Sometimes. Why not use a notebook?" Grandpa looked toward the living room before answering. "I figured no one would throw away family pictures." That answer stayed with me. A few minutes later, Mom's car pulled into the driveway. Grandpa quietly closed the album. "We'll finish this another time." I nodded and slipped the thought into the back of my mind. The moment I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about those numbers. I pulled out every postcard Grandpa had ever mailed me. Most contained ordinary updates. A few mentioned balancing his checkbook. One even joked, "Still proud that the bank hasn't confused me yet." That sounded exactly like him. The next morning, I requested permission to share something with the investigative team. Not evidence, just an observation. The lead investigator listened while I explained what I'd seen. "You think the numbers represent account balances?" "I can't prove it. But they increase gradually over time." He leaned back. "Interesting." A few days later, I received another call. This time, investigators had photographed the backs of every picture in the album with Grandpa's permission. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Each number matched a different point in time. Each one appeared in chronological order. and each balance was consistent with someone carefully tracking the amount of money he believed should still be in his account. The final photograph carried the largest clue of all. The balance written in pencil was thousands of dollars higher than the official account balance investigators had obtained from the bank. I stared at the comparison sheet. "He knew," I whispered. The investigator nodded slowly. "It certainly appears he believed he had more money than the account reflected. He was keeping his own records. And hiding them." Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. "Why hide them in a photo album?" He looked toward the evidence folder. "If someone else controlled the house?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A notebook could disappear. Bank statements could be redirected. A calendar could be replaced. But an old family photo album? Most people would never think to search behind every picture. For the first time since this investigation began, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel: hope. Not because the case was over. Far from it. But because Grandpa had left behind something that spoke when he couldn't. By the end of that week, the investigative team met with federal prosecutors to review everything they had gathered: financial records, electronic submissions, property purchases, the hidden balance records from the photo album. When the meeting ended, the lead investigator called me with a simple update. "We've reached the point where we're confident enough to move forward. No celebration, no dramatic speech. Just one sentence. It was the first time anyone involved believed they finally had enough evidence to take legal action." Grandpa's 83rd birthday arrived on a bright Saturday afternoon. If someone had walked into the house without knowing everything that had happened over the past few months, they would have thought it was just another family celebration. The backyard was full. Kids chased each other across the lawn. Someone had country music playing through an old Bluetooth speaker. Uncles argued over who made the better barbecue. Aunts crowded around the dessert table comparing pie recipes. For a little while, everything looked normal. Grandpa sat near the patio with a light blanket over his knees, smiling politely whenever someone stopped to wish him a happy birthday. I noticed he wasn't talking much, mostly listening. Mom floated from group to group, making sure everyone had food. She looked relaxed, confident. Michael stayed close to the grill, laughing louder than anyone else. If you didn't know him, you'd think he didn't have a single worry in the world. Jason spotted me first. "There she is." He walked over carrying a soda. "I wasn't sure you were coming. I told Grandpa I'd be here." He nodded. "I'm glad." It was the first friendly conversation we'd had in weeks. Maybe he was trying. Maybe we both were. "I heard work's been keeping you busy," he said. "It has." "You still chasing scammers?" "Every day." He smiled. "Well, today's a day off." "I hope so." For a second, the tension between us almost disappeared. Grandpa waved me over. "There she is." I leaned down and hugged him. "Happy birthday." "I'm happy you're here." "So am I." He squeezed my hand for just a second longer than usual. Then Mom appeared carrying a birthday cake. "Everyone," she clapped her hands, "let's get Grandpa over here before the candles melt." The family gathered around the table. People laughed while trying to organize 30 relatives into one photo. Someone joked that we needed a drone just to fit everybody into the frame. Even I laughed. For a brief moment, it felt like maybe this family still existed, the one I remembered growing up in. Then I looked toward the driveway. 3 vehicles turned in one after another. None of them belonged to family. Conversation slowed. Michael noticed them first. "Who's that?" I already knew. The lead federal investigator stepped out of the first SUV. Behind him came 2 more investigators carrying document cases. A county sheriff's deputy followed a few steps behind. Nobody rushed. Nobody raised their voice. They simply walked toward the backyard. Mom looked at me. "What is this?" I didn't answer. The investigator introduced himself calmly. Good afternoon. He showed his credentials. We need to speak with several individuals regarding an ongoing financial investigation. The music stopped. Someone quietly turned off the speaker. One by one, conversations died. The backyard became so quiet I could hear the wind moving through the trees. Mom's expression hardened. Elizabeth? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. You did this. I met her eyes. I followed the law. You brought federal agents to your own father's birthday? I didn't choose the timing. The lead investigator opened one of the document cases. We have court-authorized warrants and investigative orders. Michael slowly stepped backward. Nobody seemed to notice except the deputy. Sir. Michael froze. I was just going to grab something inside. I'd prefer you stay here. The deputy's tone stayed polite, firm. Michael forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jason looked from me to the investigators, completely confused. Can somebody tell me what's happening? Nobody answered immediately. Instead, the investigators began placing folders across the patio table. Bank records, property records, transfer histories, electronic filing logs, one folder after another. Mom folded her arms. This is harassment. No. The investigator replied evenly. This is evidence. Jason stepped closer. What evidence? The lead investigator opened the first binder. Retirement benefit transfers. The second. Electronic account changes. The third. Bank surveillance photographs. Then another. Vehicle purchase records. Michael's face lost its color. Jason picked up one of the documents. He frowned. What am I looking at? Read the account holder's name. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Then he turned to another document. Then another. His breathing changed. He looked at Michael. Then at Mom. I thought... Nobody interrupted him. I thought Grandpa wanted you handling his money. Mom answered immediately. He did. The investigator quietly slid another document toward Jason. Please continue. Jason studied it for several long seconds. Then another. And another. The confidence he'd carried only minutes earlier disappeared. He wasn't looking at accusations anymore. He was looking at records. Real ones. Grandpa stood slowly. The entire backyard stayed silent. Even the kids had stopped talking. He rested one hand on the back of his chair while looking around at every face in the family. When he finally spoke, his voice shook. I need to tell the truth. Mom stepped forward immediately. Dad, you don't have to do this. He didn't even look at her. I do. He swallowed hard. They told me, if I kept asking questions about my money, his voice caught for a second, they'd send me to a nursing home. Nobody moved. I was told this house would be sold. He looked around the room, and I'd never come back. I felt my stomach drop. Grandpa wasn't crying. He sounded exhausted, like someone who had been carrying the same weight for years. They'd bring papers to me. He looked down at his hands. They'd tell me they were insurance forms, or banking forms, or paperwork the government needed. He closed his eyes. I signed them because I was scared. Mom finally broke the silence. That's not what happened. Her voice was louder now. Dad, you're confused. I'm not confused. It was the strongest I'd heard Grandpa sound in months. I asked where my money was. He slowly turned toward her. You always had an answer. The investigator quietly placed another document on the table. One of the signatures, then another. Electronic filing records, bank surveillance photographs. Everything lined up. Michael looked toward the driveway. The deputy noticed immediately. I wouldn't. Michael stopped walking. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked like someone who had run out of explanations. Mom looked around the family. You're all just going to believe this? Nobody answered. Jason picked up another document, then another. His hands were shaking. He looked at Mom. You told me Grandpa wanted you handling everything. He did. You told me the money was being used for his care. It was. Jason held up the financial summary. Then why was his insurance almost canceled? Mom opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He flipped another page. The SUV. Another page. The vacation. Then he looked at Grandpa. You didn't know? Grandpa slowly shook his head. Jason sat down without saying another word. The investigators moved carefully. No shouting. No dramatic scene. Just procedures. Michael was informed he was being detained pending financial fraud charges. Mom followed a few minutes later. As they were escorted away, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. You chose strangers over your family. I answered quietly. I chose Grandpa. She didn't respond. The patrol car doors closed. The backyard stayed silent long after they drove away. Nobody felt like eating birthday cake anymore. Over the next several months, the criminal case moved through court. The evidence held. Michael was charged with financial fraud and theft of retirement benefits. Mom was charged with financial exploitation of an elderly adult, along with identity-related offenses connected to the account changes. The court froze the remaining money investigators were able to recover. Most of it was eventually returned to Grandpa. A court-appointed independent conservator took over management of his finances. Not me. That was important. Grandpa deserved someone completely neutral. Jason called me one evening after one of the hearings. I owe you an apology. I stayed quiet. I thought you were trying to destroy the family. So did a lot of people. I should have listened. You were protecting Mom. I know. There was a long pause. I wasn't protecting Grandpa. No. His voice cracked. I wasn't. He started visiting Grandpa every weekend after that. Not because anyone asked him to. Because he wanted to. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Some relatives still blamed me. A few stopped speaking to me altogether. Family gatherings became much smaller. Some holidays were awkward. That's the part people don't usually talk about. Doing the right thing doesn't always put everything back together. Sometimes it simply stops things from getting worse. About a month after everything was finally settled, I came home from work and checked my mailbox. There it was. A postcard. Same handwriting. Same neat block letters I'd recognized since I was a teenager. I smiled before I even turned it over. The front showed a quiet lake at sunrise. The back held only one sentence. Now I can finally write to you without looking over my shoulder. I stood there in my driveway for a long time holding that little postcard. For almost 20 years, those cards had simply been part of my life. I'd never imagined one day they would become proof that my grandfather finally felt safe again. If you've made it this far, I'd genuinely like to hear what you think. Do you believe it's harder to report a stranger? I'd love to read your thought in the comments.